Okay, now that we have all of our assets sorted out, we're ready to go ahead and get started with creating hair. First thing we're going to need to do is switch into our FX module. Over here, we'll choose FX. And here we're going to be able to find all of our different dynamics, particles, fluids, cloth, so on and so forth, and of course, NHair. So I'll go ahead and open the NHair tab here and kind of tear it off so that we can see it a little more easily over here. Now, the NHair menu here is where majority of the controls and options that we're going to work with are going to be. However, there will be a few things we're going to need from the NCloth menu as well as a couple other areas, and we'll discuss those as we get to those. Now, there are several ways of creating hair, but of course, the most common way is, believe it or not, the Create Hair option right over here. I'm going to go ahead and select my mesh, and let's go ahead and grab this Create Hair option, and I'll go ahead and reset it. So the first thing you're going to see here is the output. Do we want pane effects, NURBS curves, or pane effects and NURBS curves? Think of pane effects as the geometry and NURBS curves as the actual dynamic curves that are going to drive that geometry. I'm going to choose to have both, though you really only need one or the other. You could always create curves and add the geometry, the pane effects later, or you could just display the pane effects. You don't actually have a need to see the NURBS curves. I will choose both for right now, though, just to make it a little bit easier as we get started. Rest curves we're going to pass by for right now. We'll discuss those a little bit later. Collide with mesh is a fairly obvious one. Whatever hair I create, will it collide with the mesh that's selected? We'll go ahead and leave that off for right now just to make things faster. And then I have to choose grid or at selected surface points / faces. Grid means it's going to use the UVs. This means whatever faces I select, not vertices, but whatever faces I select is where hair will be generated. So I could come in here and go ahead and select some faces right there. Go ahead and hit apply. Give that just a second, and you can see it's created some hair for me there. And you can see the blue curves as well as the brown colored hairs, which are the pane effects. And you can see there's already dynamics here as well. They don't really collide, but you can see they're pretty quick right now. Now there is a downside using this surface points faces method. And that's the fact that if you look closely over here, you'll see that everything's created in a very even manner. And that's because there's pretty much one hair created pretty much for nearly every face that we selected. And that just kind of creates for a pretty boring layout. It doesn't really make anything all that interesting. Hairs should be more randomly placed, and unfortunately when we select faces, all of our random options go away. I'm going to go ahead and undo this here. Give that just a couple of undos there. Takes a few. There we go, and that's gone. And we'll go ahead and just select the mesh, and we'll choose grid instead so that we can create them based on UVs. The UV count is how many hairs are going to be made in the U column and the V column. They, of course, multiply together. It'll be based on a grid. So we'll increase this and say maybe 25 and 25. Passive fills we'll discuss later on. There's not really the time or the place for it right now. Randomization is what's going to actually make it interesting. Rather than just spacing it evenly across the UVs, it'll randomize it. So we definitely want that because that was the issue with this one the whole time. Hairs per clump, don't worry about for right now. That's how many hairs are going to be in each one of those individual curves. This can always be changed later. Edge bounded is going to make sure that our hairs stay within our UV shells, and equalize will try to make the randomization equal in that, let's say that we have 50 hairs in one shell and 50 hairs in the other. They won't all crowd around just one side of that shell. They'll be evenly spaced, even though they will be random. Then we can choose whether the hairs will be dynamic or static. Dynamic hairs, are, of course, could be dynamic and move, right? Apply, rather physics will apply to them. And static means they won't move at all. You could use that for hair that really doesn't need to shift very much. Points per hair is the amount of vertices, or technically CVs, in every curve. The more CVs you have, the smoother the hair is going to be able to deform. However, the slower the simulation will become. The length is going to be how long each hair is going to be. Right now it's 5 grid units. And lastly, do we have a new hair system we're placing this into, or is it going to be an existing hair system? Think of a hair system as your solver. It's going to be what kind of encompasses all of the settings of this specific hairstyle that we're creating. So with this setup, we'll go ahead and hit Create Hairs. Just hit that there. It'll take just a moment. There is a status bar at the bottom of the screen. It's a little cut off by my recording software though, but you could see hairs have been created, and they've been created along those UVs. Unfortunately, it's covered the entire model, which is normal. It's using all of the UVs, and that of course encompasses the whole model here. But that's not really what I want. I want to make sure they're only kind of roughly in the area where I'm going to actually want hair. So while there is yet another way we can specifically paint hair where we want it, and we'll look at that in the next clip, what I want to do is probably make use of my bald cap. I'm going to go ahead and undo here just a few times for this hair to go away. Give that just a second to undo there. There we go. And I'll come over here, show the bald cap, and we'll use this instead. So we'll come over here to N hair, create hair, and let's actually even increase this a little bit further. Let's take this up to 35 and 35. Now, I don't need to collide with the mesh for sure here because I want to collide with the sides of his head and his forehead. I don't need it to collide just with this here, so I'll definitely leave this off right now. But I think the rest of this should be fine. Go ahead and hit Create Hairs. Now, it is going to warn me it's going to create a lot of hairs, but that's fine. This won't take long at all. I'll hit Create and I'll pause. There we go. That actually didn't take more than roughly 15 seconds, and here is our hair. Go ahead and tap rewind there. Let's hit play, and we can see that all of our hair is working and is dynamic. It's of course not colliding. However, we can fix that very easily. I'll just select this mesh over here, because that's one I actually want the collisions on. And not actually under N hair, surprisingly, but under N cloth, I can create a passive collider. Don't ask me why it's there. I'm sure they had to put it somewhere, but create passive colliders under cloth. It'll work with all nucleus, which includes particles, cloth, and hair. So create a passive collider. And now when I hit play, it will be considerably slower, but we will see that these curves, these hairs, will now actually collide with and interact with the head. And you could see that right there. So you could see this is one way to create hair in a more specific area, as well as how we could create it across the whole body if we wanted to. Now there are some issues. We could see that we actually don't have a whole lot of hairs in here. We could of course increase that count though, but we also have areas that feel kind of unnecessarily empty, like this area here and over here. So there's a lot of different ways to go about beginning to fill up these areas and also create hair in a more specific way. I'll start by looking at those in the next clip. So I'll see you all there.